Hello, ICC chess fans. I'm Grandmaster Gregory Kaidanov with a game of the day from the 7th round of Town Memorial in Moscow. Today, our game of the day is a game between British Grandmaster Luke McShane and Vladimir Kramnik. The game started with a usual Berlin defense, usual for Vladimir, who pretty much became world champion using this opening against Garry Kasparov. Luke opted for Rook e1 move, which is a relatively rare move compared to d4. The endgame, not many people can get anything in the endgame against Kramnik. It's hard to even remember when was last time he lost a game in this opening. So, but obviously Rook e1 is obviously not the line which promises white great winning chances. Anyway, so Kramnik played bishop e7. They traded knights, eventually they arrived to the position which was already tested once. White sacrifices a pawn. However, you can see he has lead in development. Black bishop on c8 and rook on a8 are still out of the game. And after a bunch of moves, smoke clears, and we can see that Black is up a pawn. However, his pawn structure is damaged, and therefore white has some compensation for the pawn. How much compensation is not so clear. There was only one game in this line prior to this one. This was a game between Russian Grandmaster Evgeny Nair and French Grandmaster Etienne Bacrot. They played this position in this year European Championship. Nair played bishop d3. Game ended as a draw. However, white put quite a bit of pressure, and at some point looks like white had almost winning endgame with extra pawn. Luke played queen e4, which is a novelty. This move is indicated by being a possible and a strong move by the computer programs. So the origin of this move is very clear. Kramnik relatively quickly answered with f5. And here Luke took a lot of time to play his next move. During the game, when I was commenting on this game on Chess FM, I had the impression that Luke spent all this time trying to figure out where exactly his compensation is. Now I have to admit my mistake, and I clearly didn't understood position as well as I should. But white definitely has compensation. Another question whether this is enough for more than equality. So eventually Luke settled for queen e3, keeping eye on a7, making sure that rook is not coming into the game too quickly, and at the same time having possibility to give this check. Now white played queen c3, and to me the most threatening queen h8 check, and to me the most natural move seems to be king g8. White doesn't have to repeat moves. He can play a move like rook d1. But objectively, once again, there is not much white has for his pawn. Vladimir decided to play a little bit sharper. He played king e7 with a couple of ideas. One is evacuate king on the queen side, where king will be more secure. And second, to bring his queen into the game via a regional maneuver. We'll see this maneuver in a couple of moves. Rook e1. King d7, this bishop on e6 is a very important defender of black's position, so no wonder white tries to trade this bishop. And now Vladimir comes with this very interesting move, queen to h8, which offers a queen trade. There is no question white is not going to accept this queen trade. And matter of fact, white can win the pawn back. And it's not like black could hold on this pawn. His weak pawns and unsafe king would eventually lead to white's winning back his pawn anyway. So white played queen to b3, double attacking those pawns, and rook e8. And after this move, rook comes into the game. Queen b7 is forced. Couple of more pawns are traded. And finally, we arrived into position with equal number of pawns and still very strong drawish tendencies. As a matter of fact, I expected a draw at any point because it feels like those pawns are very weak. At the same time, white has some trumps, like he's gonna have this passed pawn. White wins a pawn temporarily, but he's gonna lose pawn on the queen side. And open black king also is not helping black in the sense that white can always hope for perpetual if he needs one. But objectively, it's white who is trying to play for a win. White needs to get his queen back, so he saves this pawn on c2. But now black prepares to advance on all his pawns. And black maneuvers his king in a little bit safer square. Vladimir tries to play aggressively. Like, you know, you can see he keeps advancing his pawns. And of course, you know, if he will able to advance his pawn further, white will be the one who will need to think about forcing a draw with perpetual check. But in few moves, like at this point, Ronan Harzvi, who was helping me with a broadcast, and myself, we couldn't quite understand who is better in this position, period. It looks like just one of those equal positions in which it's not clear who actually is playing for a win. But eventually, I think it did become clear that white was the one who played for a win, though I'm suspecting that at this point, Vladimir was thinking about the same thing. I remember reading in New in Chess magazine annotations to their game from London Chess Classic, which Vladimir won, and he mentioned that Luke is one of those players who plays very aggressively, but at the same time always gives his opponent chances for a win. And my impression was that, remembering this game, Vladimir was always ready to take over the initiative. So he always was watching possibility to play for a win. After all, his passed pawns look very good. This passed pawn is more advanced than, let's say, white's h pawn. But I think this was this kind of attitude was somewhat a part, somewhat a reason why eventually he found himself in a worse position, because he's so good in saving worse positions that I think if he would just kind of focus on making a draw, he shouldn't have any problems with that. But I think he was more like in the frame of mind of, okay, I can make a draw at any time, but I know my opponent is going to play for a win, so I'll try to keep life in the position. That's my impression of the way he played. It doesn't mean like he was going for a win by all costs, but I think he was thinking about playing for a win. He's a great endgame player, but he maybe somewhat overestimated his chances. This is maybe the first moment when he made a real inaccuracy. Again, it was very hard to understand this during the game. But after the game, after some analysis, it appears that maybe keeping king closer to the king side would be a better way of playing. What makes it easier for black in this position is that he can always play queen f6, offering a queen trade, and with a queen being close to the king, king feels very secure, and this position looks very balanced. White rook is contained by black queen, so it doesn't look like white has serious winning chances here at all. So it's basically just white queen against black queen, like for example h4, queen f6, queen h7, queen f7. Looks like very equal position. The game should end as a draw. However, Vladimir played king c7, queen takes f5, e4, and now white launched his passed pawn. Now, all of a sudden, it already clear that black has some difficulties. The main reason is that, first of all, he can't play a move like rook c1 because of queen f4 check, wins the rook. Let's say black would play something like king to b7, and white would play h5, and black would play the same move rook c1 now. Trade, king g2. Theoretically speaking, black has two connected pass pawns, but as you can see, unlike white, it's very difficult for him to activate his pawns. And meanwhile, white's pawn is very far already, and there is no problem for him to move this pawn further. White is going to play queen f6, h6, and to stop this pawn is incredibly difficult. At the same time, white king is very safe, which in queens and king pawn endgame is maybe one of the crucial factors. So black is probably losing in this point. So this would force Vladimir to play this move rook c3. He basically is looking for a counterplay. His plan is to play rook f3 to create pressure on f2. But white plays queen e5 check and moves his pawn again. This pin on the diagonal forces black to look for salvation in the rook endgame. Rook endgame, by the way, also looks quite good for white. And Luke took quite a bit of thing here. But considering that how open black king is, it makes sense for white to continue playing for a win in this endgame rather than going into the rook endgame. By the way, later when Ron and I looked at the rook and pawn, king and pawn endgame, it became clear that it's not as simple as it looks. In our brief analysis, we had an impression that black is holding up. So queen e7 check, king b6. At this point, both players approach the time trouble. Second time trouble. The first time control was on move 40. The second time control was on move 60. This tournament features a little bit unusual time control because there are 3 time controls. And after 60 moves, there is a third time control when both sides have 15 minutes till the end of the game with a 30 seconds increment. So this explains why in this position Luke gave a bunch of checks. Not only in this position, you will see this pattern later as well. It looks like he could push this pawn, and the position king on b6 and queen on e7 suits him perfectly. For example, after something like rook f3, rook f1, e3, he can afford this move h7. And it transpires that there is very little black can do in terms of his attack on white king. Rook takes f2 is impossible because of queen takes e3 check, and therefore black's resources to attack white king are almost exhausted. I mean, he takes f2, king g2, and this also looks good enough for white. And meanwhile, white is threatening to queen his pawn by playing queen d8 check and h8. There was something that apparently Luke didn't like, because he repeated position a few times, and then eventually he played this move queen e8. By the way, this stops black from playing rook f3 because of queen b8 check. So because of the increment, because you get 30 seconds for every move you make, my guess is that Luke's main goal was to win time on the clock and to get closer to time control, which he was able to accomplish, and he played h6. Black played rook f3. Again, couple checks, and then queen c5, very nice move, which protects e3, and at the same time attacks c6. Vladimir had interesting move e3. However, white can protect his g3 pawn with a check, and then take this pawn on e3. And considering how open black king is, how far advanced is h6 pawn, and finally the fact that black queen has still guard the a1 square, because at this point white's attack on lonely black king becomes decisive. Considering all those factors, black has hard time developing his initiative with e3. So Vladimir remained playing passively. One more repetition, and finally Luke finds one more human move, rook c1, attacking the pawn on c6. Black played rook f6, protecting this, h7, rook h6, and this is another critical moment of the game. At this point, Luke had incredible computer win, which in my opinion is impossible to see over the board, especially after a long game. So the idea of this computer win is to put black in Zugzwang after something like queen a7 check. No, king a6 is more precise. And now, if white moves his rook pretty much anywhere, this position is very unique, because very rarely, with so many pieces and pawns on the board, you see a situation in which black has hard time finding a move. But the problem is that black queen is kind of overloaded. It has to hold b1 and a1, the squares of penetration of white rook, and at the same time it has to be on this diagonal to guard black pawn. And black rook has to guard the pawn on h5 and maybe keep an eye on pawn on c6 in some lines. Pawns cannot move because they could easily be taken. So paradoxically, this is a lost position for black. However, like I said, very difficult to see those moves over the board. And Luke has to be congratulated on finding a human move, but at the same time very strong move, king g2. Quiet move which improves a little bit position of white king, secures the back rank, and white keeps all his trumps. Black pieces are still tied down. And let's not forget, Kramnik is also has some sort of chime, though they just passed chime control, so Vladimir did have some time to think about this position. However, this looks like a situation in which Vladimir made a mistake, after which the game was over. He played Queen b3, overlooking many actually different resources for White in this position. Queen f6 was somewhat better, with the same idea that Black is threatening Queen f3 check, but the advantage of this move is that the Queen still holds both c6 and h8, and therefore it's more difficult for White to accomplish something. At the same time, to say that this move would solve absolutely all problems and the game is a dead draw would be a mistake. After something like Queen b4 or maybe Queen a3, White's attack with Rook b1 followed by Queen a7 or Queen a8 is so strong that at some point Black will have to give up pawn on a4 and go into this endgame. And though this endgame is double-edged, I mean, it's better for White. Let's put it this way. It's clearly better for White, but at the same time, Black does have chances for a draw. It's very difficult endgame to play, much harder for Black than it is for White. White has advantage that his king is just a little bit more active, but computer evaluates as a better for White. Now when I'm looking at this, I feel like this is maybe closer to a draw than it is for a win for White. But in any case, basically White has one extra champion because after g4 his pawn's already set in motions and Black has to play king b6 in order to play c5. That's what gives White advantage in this endgame. Whether this is enough for a win, it's very hard to tell. Only analysis can prove that. In the game, Vladimir played Queen b3, and after few checks, Luke eventually found a winning plan. He had other winning plans as well. One of them had something to do with h8 queen, with the queen on d8. Like, for example, right here, this is a fascinating line, and after queen f3 check, White plays king f1. This is quite difficult move to see. And the idea is that here, and for example, if Black plays rook takes h8, White simply gives a check and takes Black queen. But Luke found another line which was good enough. Again, couple checks to add time on the clock. Finally, queen f3 check, and now he has two winning moves. Both king h3 and king h2 are winning. King h3, in my opinion, is somewhat king h2 is somewhat easier win, in the sense that it's maybe 10 moves calculation, but all moves are forced and White king runs away from the checks, eventually winning the game. At least this was our impression during the broadcast. Fascinating position, but eventually king runs away from all those checks, and this should be win for White. Luke opted for much more complex line, in which the game goes into the queen and pawn king endgame. White has only one extra pawn at the moment. By the way, we can appreciate why on move 68 Vladimir played king a7, not king b7, because after queen takes d5, this pawn is checking without a check. However, the pawn on e4 is kind of doomed. There is no way for Black to protect this pawn, and after a little bit of shuffling, eventually they reach position in which it becomes clear that to save this pawn is impossible. White is threatening simply check the pawn, and game is pretty much over. Two pawns in the queen and king pawn endgame is just way too much. Vladimir decided to take his chances, hoping for Luke's mistake in time trouble. However, Luke played very accurately, and after those pawns starting getting advanced, Vladimir finally acknowledged his defeat. Really titanic struggle, long game, 94 moves, some mistakes, but I have to tell you, you can't rely on what computer is saying. You have to understand that those mistakes were human mistakes in the sense that they were mistakes of great players. They were extremely difficult mistakes to point, to see, and I'm sure that if this game would be played, before computers were around in 1980s, people will see this was like perfectly played game. Very difficult to see all those little mistakes they made. Great game from both players, and especially great game for Luke McShane. His second win, he beat Levon Aronin in this tournament. And he's on +1 and sharing a lead after 7 rounds with 4 other players. This was Grandmaster Gregory Kaidanov. Thank you very much for your attention. Goodbye.
Hi there, chess fans! With today's New in Chess trivia question, where during our Game of the Day coverages, you can win a 1-year subscription to the award-winning Dutch magazine New in Chess. All you have to do is to listen carefully to today's question and send your answer by email to us at trivia@chessclub.com. Please remember to also include your full name, ICC username, and postal address. And here is today's New in Chess Trivia main prize question.